The courtroom was dead silent, save for the low hum of the air conditioning and the restless shuffling of papers. Judge Holloway looked over his spectacles, his face set in a grim line that told us everything we needed to know. He was done. The death of Elias Thorne, found in a locked penthouse with no way in or out, had been ruled a suicide by every metric that mattered to the law. The defense attorney sat back, a smug look of victory painted on his face, tapping his pen against the oak table in a steady, arrogant rhythm. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth, "there is simply no evidence of a second party. The state is chasing ghosts." The judge nodded, lifting his gavel, ready to strike the final blow that would seal the case forever. I held my breath. But then the heavy double doors at the back of the room burst open with a loud, startling bang. A junior prosecutor, hair disheveled and out of breath, sprinted down the aisle, clutching a USB drive like it was a grenade. "Wait," he shouted, his voice cracking. "New evidence, Your Honor, sent anonymously 3 minutes ago." The judge hesitated, the gavel hovering in midair. The drive was plugged in. A hiss of static filled the room, followed by a voice so terrified it made my blood run cold. It was Elias. "He's here, but he can't be." The audio cut to black silence, and in that instant, the entire room knew this was no suicide. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I've been covering crime in this city for 15 years, but I have never seen a case that defied logic like the death of Elias Thorne. To understand why that recording stopped the judge cold, you have to understand the impossible nature of the crime scene. Elias was the CEO of Thorne Data, a tech giant sitting on the cutting edge of cybersecurity. He was found dead in his private office on the 45th floor of the Thorne Tower. The room was a fortress. The doors were sealed with military-grade smart locks that could only be engaged from the inside. The windows were reinforced glass that hadn't been opened. The security logs showed absolutely zero entries or exits for 4 hours prior to the estimated time of death. Elias was slumped over his desk, a single gunshot wound ending his life, his own gun in his hand. It looked like the tragic end of a man crushed by the recent data scandal rocking his company. But his family didn't buy it. His sister stood outside the precinct day after day, screaming to anyone who would listen that Elias was terrified. She said he'd told her someone was trying to destroy him, to erase him. Enter Marcus Vane. Vane was Elias's former business partner, a man with a shark-like grin and a grudge the size of the skyline. They had been in a bitter legal feud for months over intellectual property. Vane had every motive in the world to want Elias dead. If Elias died by suicide, the company's insurance wouldn't pay out, the stock would tank, and Vane could swoop in to buy the scraps for pennies on the dollar. But if it was murder, Vane was the prime suspect. The problem was, Vane had the perfect alibi. At the exact moment Elias died, Vane was at a charity gala across town, surrounded by 300 witnesses and captured on high-definition video giving a toast. I watched the footage myself. He looked calm, collected, and completely innocent. The detectives were stumped. How do you charge a man who was miles away when the victim died alone in a sealed box? The lead detective, a gruff veteran named Miller, swore he would find the crack in the armor. He vowed to prove that the impossible was just a magic trick waiting to be revealed. But as the investigation officially launched, the question wasn't just who did it was how in the world they got in, and more importantly, how they got out without leaving a trace. Before we dive into the twisted investigation that followed, I want you to hit pause for a second. Look at the facts. A locked room, sealed from the inside, a suspect with a rock-solid alibi miles away, and a victim who whispered that someone was there who shouldn't be. How would you pull this off? Scroll down and comment your theory right now. Do you think the recording is fake? Is the alibi a lie? Or is there a secret way into that office? And while you're down there, make sure you subscribe. You are not going to want to miss the twists coming up in this trial. Trust me, the secret hiding in the walls is something you won't see coming. Detective Miller started the investigation where it always starts, the silence of the crime scene. I was allowed to walk the perimeter with the press pool a few days later. The office was breathtakingly cold, a sterile box of glass and steel. But what struck Miller wasn't what he saw, it was what he smelled. Amid the leather and the metallic tang of dried blood, there was something else, a faint, sharp chemical scent. It hung in the air, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Forensic teams swabbed every inch of the room. The lab results came back with traces of a cleaning solvent called ViroCleanse. It was a potent industrial-grade cleaner used for scrubbing biological contaminants. Here's the catch. The building's cleaning crew didn't use ViroCleanse. They used a standard, eco-friendly lemon mixture. This was the first crack. Someone had cleaned something in that room, and they had brought their own supplies. Miller brought Marcus Vane in for questioning. I sat behind the glass in the observation room, watching the dance. Vane was too calm. He sat with perfect posture, his suit unwrinkled, answering questions before Miller could even finish them. It was rehearsed. It sounded like he was reading from a script he had memorized weeks ago. "I was at the gala, Detective," Vane said, his voice even. "I loved Elias like a brother, despite our differences." It was a lie, but a lie delivered with the confidence of a man who knows he can't be touched. Meanwhile, Miller's team interviewed Elias's executive assistant. She was a nervous wreck, her hands shaking as she held a cup of water. She admitted that Elias had been receiving strange calls late at night, calls where no one spoke, just heavy breathing and the sound of a ticking clock. Then came the red herrings. We found out about a disgruntled IT employee who had been fired for hacking the vending machines, a guy with the skills to mess with smart locks. We also dug up a secret investor who stood to lose millions if the scandal continued. For a week, the media circus chased these leads. Was it the hacker? Was it the money man? But Miller ignored the noise. He went back to the footage. He spent 48 hours staring at the security feeds from the hallway outside the penthouse. That's when he saw it. A glitch, a tiny, insignificant flicker in the timecode. At 8:42 p.m., the camera feed jumped. It was less than a second, a blink of an eye. To anyone else, it was just a technical hiccup. To Miller, it was a fingerprint. He ordered a full diagnostic of the building's systems. The logs were clean, suspiciously clean, but buried deep in the maintenance server in a file that was supposed to be deleted automatically was an access log for the ventilation system. Someone had accessed the service hatch on the roof 3 days before the murder. The hatch led to the main air ducts, which ran down the spine of the building. Miller sent a team up to the vents. They found the panel leading into Elias's office ceiling slightly displaced. It was subtle, but the dust seal was broken, and there, on the inner rim of the metal panel, they found a partial print. It didn't belong to a hacker or a secret investor. It belonged to someone with authorized biometric access to the building's deepest infrastructure. The fingerprint belonged to Carl Holloway, the building's maintenance supervisor. This was the breakthrough we were waiting for, the thread that would unravel the whole sweater. Miller ran Holloway's background. On the surface, he was a quiet guy, a 20-year veteran of the building staff who kept to himself. But his financials told a different, louder story. 3 months ago, Holloway's bank account, which usually hovered near zero, received a series of cash deposits totaling $50,000. The deposits were made at ATMs scattered across the city, always in small increments to avoid flagging federal regulators. Miller traced the pattern. The locations of the ATMs perfectly matched the GPS data from a burner phone linked to Marcus Vane's personal driver. The connection was thin, but it was there. Miller brought a structural engineer to the penthouse to reconstruct the vent theory. It was tight, claustrophobic, but possible. A man of Holloway's size could crawl from the service elevator shaft through the main duct and drop into the false ceiling of the CEO's office. It bypassed every camera, every smart lock, and every sensor in the hallway. The impossible locked room had a back door. But as soon as Miller secured a warrant for Holloway, the supervisor vanished. He didn't show up for his shift. His apartment was cleaned out. A citywide manhunt began. Sirens wailed through the downtown streets as patrol cars swept the grid. While the manhunt raged, the tech forensics team cracked the encryption on a cloud backup linked to Elias's smartwatch. This was the secret recording that the prosecutor would eventually play in court. It turned out Elias's watch had a distress mode that triggered if his heart rate spiked dangerously high. On the night of his death, his heart rate hit 160 beats per minute at 9:15 p.m. The watch silently opened a line to an automated backup app. We listened to the raw audio in the precinct. The sound was muddy, muffled by fabric, but distinct. We heard the click of the vent panel sliding back. We heard the soft thud of boots hitting the carpet. And then we heard Elias. He's here, but he can't be. But the enhanced audio revealed something else, a second voice. It was low, distorted, whispering instructions. Do it now. The timing has to be perfect. The timestamp on the audio was 9:15 p.m. But here was the kicker. The official time of death, based on the body temperature and the suicide gunshot, was listed as 10 p.m. The discrepancy was massive, 45 minutes. Detectives realized the crime involved a staged timeline. The killer didn't just kill Elias. They waited. They manipulated the scene. They used the building's automation against itself. The impossible locked room wasn't locked when Elias died. It was locked after. The manhunt ended at the train station. Patrol officers spotted Holloway trying to board a red-eye to the coast. He looked terrified, sweating through his jacket, clutching a duffel bag full of cash. They tackled him on the platform. He didn't fight, he just curled into a ball and stayed silent. He refused to say a word during processing. He stared at the wall, his eyes hollow. He knew he was caught, but he also knew who he was protecting. He was the small fish, and he was terrified of the shark. The weeks leading up to the trial were a blur of legal preparation and media frenzy. The district attorney decided to go for the throat, charges of conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder against both Carl Holloway and Marcus Vane. It was a risky move. Vane wasn't in the room, and his alibi was technically still solid. The prosecution's case rested entirely on proving the conspiracy, proving that Vane was the puppet master pulling Holloway's strings from across town. The defense team, led by a high-priced lawyer named Sterling, went on the offensive. They filed motions to suppress the audio recording, claiming it was too degraded to be reliable. They argued that Holloway was a rogue employee acting on his own, perhaps trying to rob the CEO, and that Vane had nothing to do with it. They painted the ventilation theory as a desperate fantasy, cooked up by incompetent police work. Where is the direct link? Sterling asked in pre-trial hearings. Where is the text message? Where is the email? You have nothing but coincidences. I watched Detective Miller work with the forensic animators. They built a 3D digital model of the ventilation system. They timed the crawl. They synced it with the glitch in the security camera. They needed the jury to see the murder, not just hear about it. The tension in the DA's office was palpable. If they couldn't explain the time gap, the 45 minutes between the heart rate spike and the official time of death, the jury might walk. Then, 2 days before the trial, a witness came forward, a janitor who worked the night shift on the roof. He claimed he saw Holloway moving heavy equipment near the intake fans days before the murder. He hadn't spoken up because he was undocumented and feared deportation. His testimony was the final brick in the wall. The stage was set. The trial of the century began on a rainy Tuesday. The courtroom was packed shoulder to shoulder. The air smelled of wet wool and anxiety. The prosecution opened with the emotional heavy hitters. Elias's sister took the stand, weeping as she described her brother's fear. She told me Marcus wouldn't stop until he was dead, she sobbed. The jury looked moved, but sympathy doesn't equal a guilty verdict. The defense countered immediately. They brought up the charity gala. Witness after witness testified that Marcus Vane was charming, present, and accounted for all night. He never left the ballroom, a prominent socialite testified. I was with him at 9:15 p.m. We were discussing the auction. Then came the cross-examination. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lopez, hammered the alibi.
She didn't attack the witnesses, she attacked the timeline. She showed that while Vane was at the party, he spent significant time taking calls on the terrace. "Is it true, sir," she asked a waiter, "that the terrace is dark and secluded?" The waiter nodded. "Yes, ma'am." It was a chink in the armor, but not a break. Finally, Carl Holloway took the stand. He looked small in the witness chair, his orange jumpsuit hanging off his frame. He stuck to the script. "I didn't kill him," he mumbled. "I was fixing the AC." He denied everything. He denied the money, the vent, the recording. The defense looked pleased. Then Lopez played her ace card. "Your Honor, the people request to play the enhanced audio recording from the victim's smartwatch, specifically track 4, isolated frequency." The courtroom went silent. The speakers crackled. We heard the struggle again. But this time, the second voice, the whisper, was clearer. Digital enhancement had stripped away the background hum. "Marcus says to wait," the whisper hissed. "Wait for the signal." The jury gasped. Carl Holloway's face went white. He looked at the defense table. Marcus Vane wasn't looking at him. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. Then Detective Miller took the floor for the demonstration. He set up the 3D simulation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Miller said, his voice booming. "At 9:15 p.m., Carl Holloway entered the room through the vent. He subdued Elias. But he didn't kill him immediately. He waited. Why? Because he was on the phone." He pointed to the screen. He was listening to the gala. He was waiting for Marcus Vane to step onto the terrace. Once Vane was clear of witnesses, he gave the order. Miller continued. "Holloway staged the suicide. He used the virocleanse to wipe his own traces. Then he did something brilliant and terrible. He accessed the smart lock system from the inside terminal. He set a delayed seal command, a feature used for maintenance checks. He set the locks to engage 10 minutes after he left. He crawled back out the vent. 10 minutes later, the room sealed itself. The computer logged the lock time as 10 p.m. The timeline was a digital lie." The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to Holloway. He was trembling. The prosecutor leaned in. "Mr. Holloway, we have the voice match. We have the money. It's over. Tell us the truth." Holloway looked at Vane one last time. Vane finally looked back, his eyes cold, offering no help. Holloway broke. "He made me," Holloway sobbed, his voice shattering the room. "He said he'd kill my family. He was on the earpiece. He listened to him die. He listened to the whole thing." Pandemonium erupted. The judge banged his gallet, but no one heard it. Marcus Vane's composed facade cracked. He stood up, shouting, "He's lying. This is a setup." But the damage was done. The conspiracy was laid bare. The impossible locked room was just a delayed timer and a corrupt employee. The technology that Elias Thorne had built to keep people safe had been hacked to hide his murder. The verdict came back in less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. As the foreman read the word guilty, a wave of sound washed over the courtroom. Sobs from Elias's family, shouts from the press, and the heavy exhale of a city that had been holding its breath. Marcus Vane didn't scream this time. He just slumped into his chair, the arrogance finally drained out of him. He looked old. He looked finished. The bailiffs moved in, handcuffing him with the same cold, metallic click that had started this whole mystery. Elias's sister hugged Detective Miller, her tears wetting his jacket. It wasn't a happy ending, her brother was still gone, but it was the truth, and in a world of deep fakes and digital lies, the truth is a rare currency. As I walked out of the courthouse, the sun was breaking through the rain clouds. I thought about the smart locks, the sensors, the cameras. We surround ourselves with systems designed to protect us, assuming they are infallible. But this case was a haunting reminder that every system has a creator, and every code has a backdoor. Elias Thorne died because he trusted the walls around him, but the walls have ears, and sometimes they have vents. The perfect crime isn't the one that breaks the laws of physics, it's the one that breaks the laws of trust. So, I have to ask you, seeing how easily the timeline was manipulated, how would you have solved this? Would you have caught the glitch in the camera feed? Or would the perfect alibi have fooled you too? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.
And if you have a theory about another impossible crime involving modern tech, share it. I read every comment. Thank you for following this investigation with me, from that first terrifying audio clip to the final swing of the gavel. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Thorn case, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We have an even darker mystery coming up next week, a case involving a vanishing plane and a pilot who never existed. You won't want to miss it. Stay safe and keep watching.